Yeah, there you go.
Please continue enjoying your dinner and finishing dessert. We're going to get it started. My name is Karen Page. I'm the president and CEO of Kansas Global. I'm also a board member on the World Trade Council. And about 6 weeks ago, after a trip to Washington, D.C., at which Kansas Senator Pat Roberts challenged me to do something more on educating the folks at home about NAFTA, I proposed to the World Trade Council board that we do a panel on NAFTA. And the gentleman that I have sitting to my left, to your right, graciously agreed to give up their time this evening so that we could have a conversation about the impact of NAFTA on Kansas business and the Kansas economy. And so without too much more about me, I want to just tell you one thing. I know you don't have bios in front of you, and I know many of you, but let me just tell you in context of this panel why I'm here and hopefully the role I'll be able to play for you tonight. I serve as a private sector advisor, a volunteer, an appointed position to the U.S. Trade Representative or the U.S. Trade Ambassador in the U.S. Department of Commerce in matters of trade policy, including free trade agreements for small businesses in Kansas and across the United States. In fact, I serve as the chair of Industry Trade Advisory Committee, now number 9, used to be number 11. Trump administration has done some streamlining, so now I have to rephrase. I've been 11 for about 15 years, so now number 9. What that allows me to do is something quite unique and a real privilege. That is that as a cleared advisor, I have security clearance so that I can see the text that the U.S. proposes before they become a free trade agreement and comment on them on behalf of small businesses. So this NAFTA renegotiation will serve as my 4th free trade agreement that I've watched to be created from the United States. The first one that I remember was the U.S. and South Korea. And I think that we had a little bit of Peru kind of in the middle of there, and then I was definitely involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. In fact, I can tell you that I read the entire agreement and provided comment on it, as it was my duty as the chair of ITAC 11 to provide comment by law. So without going into many more, thank you so much. Without going into any more detail, I wanted to give you that role. I've known many of you for years, but you may not know I play that role. And probably the reason is because as a cleared advisor, I'm sworn to secrecy. So I can't tell you anything that I learned in the closed door meetings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very briefly just introduce. I know you probably know who's up here, but let me just tell you. And then I'm going to actually have them provide an introduction, an opening statement, so to speak, in terms of their role and what role they play in regard to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Before I do that, does anyone know how much trade occurs in NAFTA today? Anyone? I know I have traders in the room. Billions, trillions, anyone have a guess? I've got like 7 Kansas Global staff, and so if one of them doesn't pipe up.
So we export $520 billion to Mexico.
$520 billion, that's from Kansas?
No, that's from the United States.
Okay. So
From Kansas, it would be like 1.85 of aeronautical stuff and another 1.5 of food agriculture.
yeah, we're talking billions with the B, right?
Right.
And we have like 1.1 trillion in 3-way trade. So we're talking real money here in the North American free trade area. So before I do that, though, I don't want to forget this. I wanted to mention some people in the room. We have some other folks who have joined us this evening, including Kimberly Lewis from the Canadian Consulate, who runs the Consular Affairs. We have Brent Robertson and Katie Sawyer, also from Congressman Marshall's office. We have Debbie Looper from Congressman Ron Estes' office, Mike Zamjola from Senator Moran's office as well. So I wanted to thank all of you for being here. We really appreciate you being here to be a part of this conversation. And Chung Liu from the Kansas Department of Commerce and the Trade Division joined us at one of the tables at dinner. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. The other thing I wanted to mention to you is just a couple of statistics to set the stage. So I mentioned the 1.1 trillion. The congressman had also mentioned the billions of dollars that we're exporting to Canada and Mexico. But let me also just tell you that from total trade from Kansas in 2016 was 10.2 billion. Of which a good portion of that, about 20% of that, was actually going to Canada and Mexico. So this is a big number. This is really important trading partners. Another thing that might be interesting to you is about 50% of Kansas' total exports go to countries with which we have a free trade agreement. Of those, the largest by a majority actually goes to the North American Free Trade Agreement, Canada and Mexico. And so I wanted to mention a couple of those. We have lots more information, and I want you to know that anyone who is here tonight, if you want more information in detail, holler at me or send a note to Kansas Global on our website, and we'll send you some more detailed information about how free trade agreements get built, about where we are in the NAFTA process, data, anything that you would want, we'd be happy to share that with you so you have more information. So, to my distinguished panelists. Directly to my left, I have Head Consul Alfonso Navarro Bernacci of the Mexican Consulate in Kansas City, and then U.S. Congressman Roger Marshall of the 1st District in Kansas. We fondly call in the state of Kansas the big one because I don't know how you do it, you cover about 2/3 of geographically of the state. And then we have to his left, we have Jerome Pichella, Senior Trade Commissioner and Consul for the Canadian Consulate General of Canada in the Denver office, and then Mr. Ted J. Vlamas, Vice President of Pioneer Bloom and in charge of international trade for Pioneer as well. So if I could ask you to just give a brief statement, Head Consul, what your position is, so we understand. And remember that a lot of the folks in the room may not know what what you do as Head Consul, and then how that relates to NAFTA and the renegotiation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So glad to be here in Wichita, and just a brief comment on my duties on what the Consulate of Mexico does here from Kansas City, Missouri. The consulate is actually in Kansas City, Missouri, but as a Consul General of Mexico in this area, I serve, and my district, my consular district, encompasses both Missouri, Kansas, and 28 countries in western Oklahoma. So it's a large consular district. And from the basic duties of any consular office to provide services and assistance to Mexicans living, conducting business, or even traveling in this area, I also promote, as the rest of the 50 Mexican consulates in the United States do, I also promote the importance of Mexico as a partner, not only in terms of trade, but also the very, very large set of disciplines that we work with the United States, how Mexico is a reliable partner, and how we certainly are conducting the current renegotiation of NAFTA. So it's part of my duties, the basic task of providing assistance and outreach to the Mexican communities in this area, but also working with relevant stakeholders in diverse communities in Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma in order to engage with them and also to foster the good relationship with our countries. So I would say that's a very basic outlook of the consular work, of the consular duties that I have to discharge.
Sorry about that. I can't see anything anymore without these reading glasses, and I forget sometimes about that. And I know some of you know me for long enough to remember when I didn't need reading glasses, so I apologize for that. Congressman Marshall, I'm so glad you're here. Would you do the same? But I also wanted to point out to the crowd, I'm really excited to hear about your trip to Mexico City. I did not realize when we asked Congressman Marshall to be here with us this evening that he was actually going to be able to attend and be present at the 7th round of NAFTA renegotiation in Kansas City, or I'm sorry, in Mexico City. So if you would tell us a little bit about the role you've been playing, and then if you want to touch on what you experienced in Mexico City, that would be amazing.
All right, so Karen, thanks for having me. Let me start by saying to my friends on my left and the right, thank you for your business. You know, we don't tell our customers that enough. Canada imports $280 billion a year from the United States, and Mexico imports $240 billion a year. These two countries import, it's actually 36%. I've been saying a third, but I was in Mexico City and one of the people there corrected me and said 36% of Kansas exports go to these two countries. So thank you for your business, and we don't take it for granted. Since NAFTA was formed in 1994, the amount of agriculture exports from this state have went up a multiple of 7. The merchandise has doubled. Our largest exports, of course, is food, agriculture products, about $1.5 billion from Kansas to these two countries, and $1.85 billion of aerospace type of stuff as well. So thank you so much for your business. I'm honored to be here. I represent the largest ag producing district in the country, the largest ag producing district in the country. Say that again, and the second most NAFTA dependent district in the country when it comes to jobs. The number of jobs created by NAFTA were the second most dependent. I think I've talked long enough. I'll promise to talk about my trip to Mexico City when the chance comes up. I'll yield.
Thank you, Congressman. And we're very pleased to be your customer. We're also very pleased to be your first business partner. Canada is, for sure, very, very important to Kansas and vice versa. So my name is Jerome Pichala. Good evening, or bonsoir for those of you, the three of you that may speak French. I work at the Consulate of Canada along my colleague Kimberly Lewis, who's sitting right here. Similar to our counterparts in Kansas City for Mexico, we provide service to Canadian citizens. If anyone among you is a dual citizen, come and see us. We work with our friends that are elected officials. And I lead the team that does trade, so supporting Canadian companies that want to do business in Kansas, but also likewise companies from Kansas that want to do business in Canada, whether you're talking about direct sales or links in research and development, investment, both ways, you name it. So that's pretty much what we do. I will not try to top you on stats. We can do a fight on that later on.
There we go. Did I mention that China only imports half the amount of products in dollars that we export to Mexico and Canada? Only half.
I guess I got to top that. Yes, I'm a nerd. Did you know that Canada buys more from the US than Japan, South Korea, China, and the United Kingdom combined? And now I'll pass it.
I'm Ted J. Vlamis, Vice President with Pioneer Balloon Company. I'm in charge of our international division. We manufacture party balloons at our facilities in all 3 NAFTA countries and ship to over 100 different countries around the world. I'm looking forward to sharing with you tonight why we're so proud of our facilities and our employees in all 3 NAFTA countries, and why the whole of these is so much bigger than the sum of the parts.
Thank you, Ted. So now I prepared a few questions for my panelists, but I wanted to let you know, if you haven't figured out before, I actually asked them if they would be interactive and we could have a conversation. I think so far we're doing fairly well. I will ask you to think of questions that you would kindly hold to the end, but I'll try to get us started with something, some interesting questions of each of our panelists. So I'm going to actually start with Congressman Marshall. I wanted to acknowledge your leadership. If I didn't say that, if it wasn't obvious, let me just explain. We have been had the privilege of working with Congressman Marshall actually since mid last year. And it's fairly significant to have leadership in Washington, D.C. I don't spend as much time as he does there, but enough time to tell you it's quite a challenging environment. And he has done such great things on behalf of Kansas ag producers and as well as companies for the entire state. I also wanted to note that I doing a little bit of research for this, and I was aware of this previously as well, that he led the freshman class, the GOP, in sending a letter to the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer about the importance of trade enforcement. That was actually last summer, but he's done more since then. But can you tell us a little bit about why you took that leadership role on trade? And why it was so important to organize and send a letter, as well as some of the other things you've done since then.
I sat down with the vice president maybe 2 months ago, and he asked me, what's the biggest challenge in Kansas? And I said, it's the price of wheat, it's the price of sorghum, it's the price of corn, cattle, and oil. We had a farm bill to write, but the biggest problem was the price of those commodities. 3 years, generational lows. Whether you have a community bank or a big bank, the co-op or the grocery store in town, or the hospital in rural America, without those prices going up, it's not going to be pretty. The only thing that I can do as your congressman to increase the price of wheat is to sell more of it, to open more markets. So it starts with taking care of good customers. These are all, I'm a business guy in a position, I'm not a politician. And this is just how you take, your customer service, all those things. So my job, I think, we'll get a farm bill written here next month or two. It's vitally important. But for the next 5 years, trade is going to be the #1 issue for agriculture. 60% of the economy in my district is agriculture related.
Thank you. I'm now going to move to Head Consul Alfonso Navarro. I thank you for being here with us today. I know that, that you had to rearrange a little bit of your schedule and you drove down from Kansas City this morning. You have a background in trade and diplomacy with an emphasis on migration, which I read with great interest. I'm interested in your work on migration, but we can talk about that another time. Let's talk about NAFTA today. So what are your priorities and what kind of activities support this? And your time as head consul at the Kansas City Consulate.
Is migration and immigration the same thing, or is it different? I'm serious. Well, let's talk about it. Let's do.
You think so?
I do. It's immigration.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem in Kansas. The #1 problem in Kansas right now, the economy is facing, is a lack of skilled work. The #1 problem in Kansas right now is a lack of skilled workers. So immigration, we have to take this head on. I'd be interested in the consulate's comments about immigration.
And it certainly took a very important place in the visit that Mr. Kocher made yesterday to Mexico, because the focus of the U.S.-Mexico relation has to be comprehensive. It's not only trade, yes. It's not only border security, it's not only drugs, it's the way that we work and collaborate together in order to advance those issues that are closely related. Immigration is one of them. Absolutely.
Okay, sorry.
No,
back to NAFTA.
It is. It's all. You're absolutely right. It's all related. And as we're working with Kansas companies, all across the state, the #1 issue is getting talent. And so, as we talk about NAFTA, I'll leave that to you. How much you want to talk about that? But as you look at NAFTA, when you started at Kansas City as a head consul, it was almost directly the same time as we started renegotiation with NAFTA. I looked at the dates, it was like 30 days different. So I imagine you've spent a lot of time talking to the states for which you were responsible about NAFTA and looking at the Mexican view and making sure that both are met. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yes, sure, and thank you. And certainly, obviously, immigration and all these topics that I mentioned are so important, and again, they are closely related. But then we face the challenge of the new the NAFTA 2.0 situation. But back in 2016, one of my first duties was to start closely analyzing what was happening in these states, both Kansas and Missouri, and what is important, the importance of Mexico for those specific states, because as you mentioned at the beginning, there are big numbers related to NAFTA for our three countries. But when you have a conversation with the local business people, or with the agricultural exporter to Mexico, or people conducting business with Mexico, you start to see, well, I have 5 jobs that are related to trade with Mexico, or I have a chain of production that is vital because of NAFTA and cannot be just concluded or finished if NAFTA goes away. So I started to do that, and one of the important things is also to create awareness that this is not a Mexican issue, this is not a Canadian issue, this is certainly not a U.S. issue. It's an issue that is relevant for a region. And the way that in the present time commerce worldwide is conducted is commerce between regions, not between countries. And that's, I mean, this multilateral, if you will, focus on trade is very important. And one of the main goals of Mexico in this negotiation is to maintain and to enhance the competitiveness of North America as a region. So that's why we are clearly engaged in this negotiation, because we want, at the end of the day, a win-win-win situation that will be good for the country. So back to 2006, I started to engage with local authorities in order to advance this idea. And very important, last year in the University of Kansas in Lawrence, we have a conference that was not related only to NAFTA, but it was related to Mexico, NAFTA, and the heartland, in order to underline the importance that for this region of the country has NAFTA and also Mexico as a partner. So at that time we had the opportunity to have this conference with the, then he was the trade representative of Mexico in DC, Mr. Kenneth Smith Ramos, and he went on to be at the head technical negotiation of NAFTA. So his presence here was very important, and obviously he had a very clear sense of what is the importance for agricultural sector, for the air and space industry from Kansas as related to Mexico. So it's part of the working locally to produce regional or global results, and obviously to have a larger amount of relevant stakeholders, agency, and people engaged in this core renegotiation.
Thank you, Head Consul Navarro. So he mentioned something, so you might notice I'm jotting down notes. So one of the key things that I took away from your comments was a couple of key words: to enhance competitiveness amongst the regions. And so thank you for that, Jerome. It is my pleasure to have really a long-time colleague. We've been had the pleasure of working with Jerome Pichela, the Consul and Trade Commissioner for Canada, for a number of years, really. And you and your colleagues. So thank you for being here. He had to, again, do some rearranging of his schedule to be here, so thank you for making that possible. I gave you a couple of questions, but I actually wanted to talk about something else, if you don't mind. So one of the things that Jerome and I kind of talked about, and I know him a little bit better than my other panelists, so I know he can handle this, but I kind of asked him to talk about what's the Canadian view? I promised them I wasn't going to get political, and I'm not going to do that. But we have 3 different countries represented here. And Ted has the dubious job of representing actually all 3 countries from Pioneer Balloon perspective. But tell us about the Canadian view of the NAFTA negotiations so far. How you're a Canadian working at the consulate, who represents really both interests. And we just finished the 7th round in Mexico City. How are you feeling about it so far?
That's an easy question to answer, not. The first thing that I like to do and start with when I talk about NAFTA is to remind those of you that are younger than 25 years old, which is the majority of the room, I believe, that the agreement is 25 years old, so it needed to be modernized. It makes absolute sense. But I also like to remind people that it's turned somehow in the United States into some sort of partisan discussion politically, when it shouldn't be. Yes, President Clinton ratified NAFTA, but most of the negotiations took place under the administration of George H. Bush. And actually the idea came from Ronald Reagan, who got along famously well with our Prime Minister at the time, Brian Mulroney. So to go back on your question, Karen, how it's seen and perceived in Canada, there is definitely a will to modernize the content of the agreement. 25 years ago, the internet was in its infancy. 25 years ago, nanotechnology was something you would read in a sci-fi book. We still have inefficiency and red tape in the paperwork that most of you who are in business need to fill out when you're shipping products to Canada and to Mexico, or from Canada and from Mexico. So can we work on that and harmonize that? And there's really good job that's being done right now. I would say that the vast majority of those points, we've reached agreement, the three countries, so this is going well. There are still issues that are problematic, but everybody's hopeful that cooler head will prevail and we'll be able to get an agreement that will be fair and balanced for the three countries and that will not jeopardize the trade relationship that we have. Just a few things I would like to add if I still have more time. When we're talking about trade, as the Congressman was doing with the Sunflower State, it's $3.4 billion. Okay, it's nothing to be trifled with. So you sell 1.8 billion to Canada and you import 1.6 billion. And it touches vastly agriculture and aerospace and machinery and equipment, but a plethora of other types of sectors as well. So why would we want to hurt ourselves on that? There's one last thing I will say. You might all have followed what happened with the tariffs on steel and aluminum. And thankfully, Mexico and Canada are not including in those tariffs at the time. I don't know if you know it, but the US actually imports more steel from Canada than from anywhere else in the world. It's a little bit over 16%, as we're discussing, of your steel that comes from Canada. However, you sell more than you import to Canada. About 2 million trillion, oh, I have to figure my facts. Anyway, 2 something. You import from us, you sell to us. Why would we want to hurt that? It would make no sense whatsoever. And especially using Clause 232, it essentially was saying that Canada is a threat to the US security and the safety of the United States. When we've been at war, I mean, we fought along each other around 2 world wars, in Afghanistan. When 9/11 happened, I don't know if you know that, but NORAD was in charge of making sure that the flights would land and there would be less risk. And the chief of NORAD is American, the second chief is Canadian. The American chief was not there, the general was not there. So it's a Canadian that was there that was saying, okay, now we're redirecting those flights. You're going to land in Montreal, you're going to land in St. John, Newfoundland. We're going to make sure that lives are safe. So if you want the Canadian view, and here I'm being very candid, when we hear something, someone or people telling us Canada is a threat to the security of the United States, it hurts a little bit. And I hope we don't go there again.
Thank you, Jerome, for that.
We're not going to finish up the steel conversation rather than jump around and come back to it. As you can't tell, I'm a numbers person, so I got to share a couple more statistics to kind of frame the conversation. And we're on the same page with this one. I think we all have the same goals, and that's what we have to stay committed to. Is we have the same goals here. Is for prosperity of the three countries. What's the saying? A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken, right? So I mean, these are the 3 strands to the cord: Mexico, Canada, the United States, and we all know who the competition is across the sea. 10 years ago, the United States and China were making the same amount of steel. So 10 years ago, China and the United States make the same amount of steel today. China makes 10 times more steel than we do. Okay. Second figure, as Jerome said, we import 16.7% of our steel from Canada. About 8% is from Mexico. They're tied for third with South Korea, and second is Brazil at 13%. China imports of steel is 2.4%. So here's my problem with the president. Is, you know, I'm a surgeon, an OBGYN, so when I take